Just as the 10th G20 Summit got underway in Turkey this week, the spotlight was still on the attack on Paris by the Islamic State that has left more than 120 people dead. Climate change was set to be the focus for this year's summit ahead of the COP21 summit in Paris, which of course will take place later this month. But terrorism now has overshadowed several economic outlooks and discussions. Joining us from our studio in Durban is economic and political analyst Isreal Mkhize. Very good morning to you, Isreal. I thank you for joining us.
Morning, Eben. Morning to the viewers.
Now, Isreal, the G20 summit got underway, somewhat overshadowed by what was the Paris attack, which has become known so far. Just tell us quickly, what do you see as the key points to have come out of G20 so far?
Well, what has come out of G20, obviously, the events in Paris overshadowed the whole conference. However, what I see is the quest for justice. Now, the quest for justice can be sought from two main angles. One, it can be sought at an international relations arena through what we call systems, or it can be sought through what we call global anarchy. Now, I'm taking this to reflect that as I see the G20, it is a continuation of how the world was structured just after World War II, where Europe would have claimed to have conquered, particularly 1989 at the fall of the Berlin Wall, have conquered the narrative, global narrative in terms of economy and political geo-thinking, that they are dominating the world. Hence, in the G20, you seeing most countries from the so-called developing countries relying on the messages and the pronouncements and the promises that are going to come from the G20 leaders and of those developed countries. But there's been less on the question of aid, because there's been discovered that even the aid that we think or have been thinking that the developing countries take from or get from G8, that it's actually being acquired from the illicit financial outflows from those developing regions. So what I see is kind of a mixed message, because there's also a deep anxiety also at the realignment of these developed countries. Previously, Putin actually, before the Paris attack, Putin has always been seen as someone who's a villain, or someone who's a naughty child, not someone who's wielding power recklessly. But today it's amazing how you look at England and how you look at America and France itself wanting to align with Putin, because they've discovered that actually we've got a common enemy. It's just that the approaches which we may have used may not have been the same, but we've got the same enemy.
Now, terror is very much in focus. Let's talk about terror in Africa and how the East-West shift is happening right now. We've of course seen a Russian airline downed in Egypt recently, then followed by Paris. Paris, of course. How do you see the Russian airline Paris? How do you see it shift relations between East and West, if any?
Well, Eben, the interesting part is that at the wake of the World War II, when Europe was fighting amongst itself and its allies, you realize that the world was framed into three legs or three quarters: the so-called developed countries, first world and second world, and communist-oriented countries, which would group your China and Russia. Then there were so-called non-aligned countries, which would be Africa and South Asia. But nobody spoke about the Arab nations' aspirations and position. In so doing, with the rise of the Bretton Woods institutions, particularly the United Nations, you see that little was considered from the aspirations of countries in South Asia. So you find that because of state capitalism and how these Western countries have been entrenched into resources, natural resources of these Arab League nations, now you find that there's been resistance. You look at the attack at America in 2011, which was very sad. But the attack was on the economic center and also at Pentagon, which is the security sector, which was sort of other people have interpreted as some form of resistance of the dominating narrative. So what's going on now is that in Africa, you've got countries that are aligned to the resistance which is being put up by the pro-Islamic sort of revolutionaries, if you were to call them. And you look at those who are mindful of the systems that have been put in place, such as the Honorable Her Excellency Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, the chairperson of the AU Commission, coming out and condemning the attacks. But you can see that there is the whole notion of protectionism of the systems which have already been put in place, which should be dealing with the questions of global security and insecurity. And very important theories are coming now to be challenged, because one of the security theory in international relations is that the more states are armed, the more there is security in the world, because no one will want to attack the next person whom they know is extremely armed. But such things are being brought into questions because there is now informal power, or what we call elusive power. Because when you deal with, for instance, terrorism, you're not dealing with state-organized kind of military power like you'd have dealt with U.S. forces, which is organized. But terrorism can actually disperse itself across and ensure that they are widely spread and they strike when you least expect. So we see now that the European zone is actually overlooking its ideological posture of the Second World War and Cold War, where Russia was actually ostracized. But you're seeing all of them coming together because you do not know where this well-coordinated but underground forces can actually strike, and how this actually affect the economy brings to me the biggest interest, because in Tunisia recently we had a gunman going wild on people there at the beach, and now how that affected the economy right there in Tunisia. You've got Egypt now. As I've been trying to follow the story to check whether the plane was an accident or was it a bomb. Now Russia comes out, it says it's a bomb. They offer $50 million. So now the question of tourism and doing business in a country which has been just recently declared to be climbing on number 2 on African economy, all of those things are coming into play.
Isreal, thank you very much for joining us. That's our resident political and economic analyst expert on Africa, Isreal Mkhize, coming to us live from Durban this morning.